Wednesday, November 6th, 2019, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So the Dow plowed to new all-time highs yesterday. It was up only 30 points, but it closed just below 27,500. S&P was slightly lower, and the NASDAQ closed up about a point and a half. So what is the end goal for the Federal Reserve and the globalists in terms of the stock market? Because as we know, the Federal Reserve, ever since its inception in 1913, has created many crises. I remember a few years ago, Matt Taibbi of Rolling Stone magazine called Goldman Sachs the big giant squid, right? That Goldman Sachs was a bubble blower. Well, the Federal Reserve is the master bubble blower. Goldman Sachs is just an agent of the Federal Reserve. So looking at the U.S. debt clock is giving me an idea, my opinion of what the end goal is for the Federal Reserve, which of course is a globalist instrument, is a City of London, Wall Street instrument to bring about, of course, a collective world order, global government through the UN, of course. I mean, I saw this story yesterday on Zero Hedge, and it says shilling. Millennials should be happy they're stuck renting. And it says millennials spend a lot of time bemoaning their ability to buy a home, forcing them to keep renting. They should want to stay renters if they know what's good for them financially. So who is Professor Robert Shiller? Well, he's from Yale University, right? That's a hotbed of globalists, we know. Skull and Bones, right? The Bush family, a lot of other presidents were Skull and Bones, right? In 2004, I think it was George Bush versus John Kerry, right? Both Skull and Bones. You see, they want you enslaved. You look back at the George Herbert Walker Bush family, one of his Walker's ancestors, he was a slave trader back in the 1800s, guy called Walker, right? So that's what they want. They want a plantation. They want the top 1% or less owning everything, and you subservient to them, right? Renting, not owning your property, right? Gary Shilling, or A. Gary Shilling, his full name, is full of BS, right? Because who wouldn't want to own their own house, their own home? What he's talking about here is all the manipulation the Federal Reserve and the banks have done with housing, right? The pump and dump. And of course, it's dangerous if you're going to buy a house and borrow too much and you don't have the wherewithal to pay for it, of course. But in a normal or in a more honest, sound money system, why can't you own your own home, right? It's one of the fundamental freedoms of the individual, right? Under common law. And that's something I want to talk about probably in another video soon. The difference between the laws that we're under these days and the law of the land that we're not under anymore, the common law, right? That made me think that story. They want us enslaved, of course, and that's true. The problem is that looking at the U.S. debt clock, if you look down at the bottom right here, I found it the other day, they keep increasing the number of data they have here. It's pretty good. The U.S. has 17,790,929 millionaires, so almost 18 millionaires. And I think that's too many for the globalists. So how do you get rid of millionaires? Well, you lure them into the stock market. You lure them into their financial instruments, right? You pump those financial instruments to unbelievable levels like we're seeing now. And you provide them with cheap credit so that they leverage themselves. And then all of a sudden you pull the plug, right? and then those 17.79 millionaires become maybe 1.7 million millionaires. And the other thing you need to look here is the top 1%, they hold 55 trillion of the wealth, 55 trillion 760 billion. The bottom 50%, they hold 1.7 trillion. So all the wealth is almost basically up to the top. They're just working on these millionaires, maybe the people below millionaire status. That's who they're going after, the middle upper class. And I think that's why people need to be careful. This is their goal. The other thing I would say, how have they been able to do this? Well, through crisis, of course. If you look at Norman Dodd's interview with G. Edward Griffin, and I highly recommend that. Google Norman Dodd, G. Edward Griffin. This was in the early 80s. Norman Dodd talks about how he investigated the Ford Foundation back in the 50s, all the nonprofit foundations that were created throughout the early 20th century. One of them was the Carnegie Foundation, right? Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundations. All these foundations have a kind of a goal. And it's interesting that his secretary went through the library at the Ford Foundation, and they found documents from 1909, at the inception of these foundations. And there was a meeting where they talked about how they could change society, right? How they could mold society. And this was in 1909, and someone said, well, absence a great war, it will take a long time. So what happened 5 years later? We had a great war, right? So I think it's been all engineered and planned. So what do you need for a great war? Well, you need a country like the US to come and finance it, which it did from 1914 to 17. And then it actually even fought in the war. And what do you need to centralize the credit to finance this war? You need a central bank. You might not agree with me on that, but that's my opinion. And it's become more and more clear the more and more I look and study these subjects. And I've been at this for many, many years. So that's what I think is the end goal here this time around. Some of you might know Lindsey Williams. He said 2-3 years ago that the stock market was going to keep going up to unbelievable levels because they want to indebt a lot of people and then bring everything down, right? I'm still convinced that that's what they're going to do. When they're going to do it, very difficult to say, of course. They want to keep people borrowing as much as possible for as long as possible. And the other thing I would say, you look at the heads of the central banks nowadays, at least the major central banks like the Federal Reserve and the ECB, they're both lawyers, right? So very important to have lawyers in this time period heading their central banks. And why is that? Well, because they know all the legal speak, right? They might not be very competent economics-wise and market-wise, but they know what they have to say. And the other thing I would say is you look at Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. His background is working for the Carlyle Group. He worked for the Carlyle Group, which is a private equity group, right? What do private equity groups do? And I would say this private equity group was started out by the Bush cabal, right? You look at George Bush Sr., he's got had big influence in the Carlyle Group. I think he was a chairman, honorary chairman. You have John Major, all the big politicians, right? Private equities are just, they're the instrument of these people, the globalists, to take over all the assets. when things get bad, right? And they have access to the central bank money, and they buy companies that go under for pennies on the dollar, and that's how the 1% get wealthier and wealthier. And the other thing I would add, they keep all of that offshore in trusts, nothing in their names, all going through London, of course, City of London, other places as well, but mainly City of London. I recommend the Spider's Web, British Financial Empire. Google that, watch that as well. So that's the end game, in my opinion. We've seen in the UK just yesterday another business is going under called Mothercare, right? 2,800 jobs lost. So it's going to keep going. They're going to keep pumping as much as possible, and they will pull the plug. That's what the Fed is there for. People need to understand that the Fed is not there to help the general public. If they were, they wouldn't have saved Wall Street, the 1% in 2008. They wouldn't have saved Wall Street just recently in the repo market, right? They're not going to save you. So that's what's going on there. So let's look at the markets now. It's a little later today. It's just before 9 a.m. London. We've got spot gold, 1486.50, up about $3. Yes, yesterday gold and silver got hit hard. It looked like someone was looking at those formations and they wanted to get gold and silver below those trend lines that they had broken. Am I discouraged? Not at all. If anything, I'm happy that I'm able to acquire more precious metals at a cheaper price. In the long term, it will all pan out, and it's a way to protect yourself. A lot of those almost 18 million millionaires, I would say, yes, they probably have some physical gold, but a lot of them think they have gold because they've got ETFs, they've got gold through their banks, right? Offshore, they think that they've got physical gold, but I think they're going to be left with nothing when everything comes down. You can benefit from it even if you're not a millionaire, and protect yourself for when this dump comes, the pump and dump, right? That's what the Fed does. It's a bubble blower. So yeah, gold is recovered from the lows of yesterday. Silver got hit harder. Silver always, most of the time, moves a lot more than gold because it's such a small market, right? And they're able to, how can I say, hit it harder. I saw the dollar as well, did well yesterday, so that didn't help in the short term, even though, as you've seen before, since 2008, when the dollar made a bottom, gold's been up as well. So in the long term, you want to be out of all the paper currencies, the dollar included. Silver right now is 17.55, down about a cent. The Dow futures up 23, 27,511. S&P 500 futures up 1.5, 3,076. NASDAQ 100 future is up 8 at 82.17. The pound is pretty much unchanged, 128.91. The pound didn't move much yesterday. The euro fell back about 0.5%. Right now it's up 0.1% at 110.88. The dollar is down slightly against the yen at 109.00. Yeah, and as I said yesterday, more hope of a trade deal. The dollar dropped below 7 versus the yuan. Right now we're at 699.68. The dollar versus the yuan. I've seen headlines as well that the big Japanese bank, SoftBank, they've made, I think, 8.6 billion loss in the latest quarter related to WeWork. So that's out there as well. Crude oil, pretty steady here, still fairly strong. WTI is down 0.2%, so it went up above 57, but still at 56.87. Brent 62.24. down almost 1%, but still fairly elevated. Bond markets, a lot of you noticed, and I got comments that the bond markets were going lower yesterday. Yes, they were. The 10-year rose about 6 basis points, which is quite a big move, and we're at 185. Right now, it's down 1 basis point. The 2-year is at 162. I think we were around 155 earlier in the week. That's another problem for the system, because with the U.S., with Uncle Sam borrowing and spending in almost record fashion, we've got $1 trillion deficits. They need to keep these rates low. So, yeah, keep an eye on that. If U.S. yields keep rising, it could weigh on the stock market. Pump and dump Fed. That's what it's all about. That's the end game. They want to go after those almost 18 million millionaires in America. They'll probably go after billionaires as well. They want all the wealth accumulated under the globalists. They want you to be rentiers. They want you to be basically vassals. That's all they want you to be, renting, paying your taxes, right? And that's what it's all about. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Make sure you hit that little notification bell above to be notified of all my new videos. Some of you have said that YouTube hasn't been notifying you of my new videos. Yes, and I've noticed when I go on YouTube, I don't see all my the videos that I subscribe. I see only a few of them. I have to search for some channels that I subscribe. But one thing is for sure, I make a video every day. So if you look for me, there will be a video every day from me, sometimes even 2. You can also follow me on Twitter, Steemit, and on DTube. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.